History is not boring. People are boring. I know that a lot of people feel like history is boring. I don't know how many times I've heard someone make that comment. My contention is that history is fascinating. What's boring is the way history is taught. So, what we're going to do today is I'm going to give an example of a stereotypical way to teach history that is useless. Then I'm going to give my view on how history should be taught. Now, if you've watched this far and you're thinking that you don't teach history, so you don't need this, I get that. Let me give you some reasons why this is worth listening to. One, I talk a lot about universal principles. So even if what I'm going to be specific to history just to keep this concise, you can apply the root of what I'm talking about to any subject you can think of. It doesn't have to be about history. I'm just particularly passionate about history. And two, everyone has to disseminate information to other people at some point. It could be to kids, coworkers, employees, customers, whatever. We all have to give people information. So if we understand how to connect with people a little bit better, we're going to be more effective at giving people information, which means communication's easier on us, the message gets through clear, everybody's better off. Now, depending on what you do, you might have to translate what I'm talking about a little bit to make use of it, but if you give it some thought, what we're talking about today is functional. All right, so my basic contention is that history, when we're looking at history, dates and treaties and locations are among the least important details, but they're almost always the details where the most emphasis is given. I think every test I ever took in school growing up, it was all about dates and treaties and things like that. Part of my beef with this is, especially these days, dates are the easiest thing to look up. Okay, you can grab your smartphone or a tablet or whatever and put in a question and find the date of something. So I think that memorizing the dates, unless we're talking about you work or are going to work in a specific field and you need to memorize that for some reason, it's pointless. My main beef is I feel very strongly that history is about people. It's not about dates. So I think we could break this down in a lot of different ways. We could look at it from a few different angles, but I'm going to streamline it. So if we consider that history is about people, it's about people's motivations, and it's about unintended consequences, I think we can have a much more useful conversation and we can make more use out of history and discover that history is really interesting if we look at it from those angles. So that's what we're going to do today. Anytime we're teaching, anytime we're passing information on to somebody, we have to connect with the audience. If we don't connect with the audience, it's not going to matter how good your information is because they're not going to listen. So we got to get that connection one way or the other. So I'm going to speak about a very specific event from this book, The Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. I'm just going to introduce it. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I'm just going to make the point. So I'm going to give a horrible example of how history should not be taught, but how I feel like it's usually expressed. And then I'm going to give the literate caveman version of how history should be introduced. And then I'll wrap it up. All right, now I'm going to give the wretched example, stereotypical example. In the summer of 416 BC, during a truce with Sparta, Athens invaded the neutral city state of Melos and demanded Melos ally with them against Sparta. After the Melians rejected this, Athens laid siege to their city and captured it in the winter. Now, was that interesting? Probably not, unless you're familiar with it and you're interested in it. Now, let's do the literate caveman version. I'm going to tell you a story about a city state that no longer exists. It's a story about a people who were minding their own business, living on an island. And you've heard about a person being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a story of an entire population being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And through no fault of their own, through no actions that they took, they were assaulted by a very powerful city state, and their population was, I should say, their city was wiped out. All the adult males were killed. The women and children were sold as slaves. Now, this happened due to a conflict between two city states that had been allies for generations. They had repelled an invasion from what at one time had been the most powerful force in the entire known world twice over a long period. And then after that, one of the city states, Athens, got imperial ideas and decided to start subjugating other cities around them. Okay, so that's the literate caveman version. So one of them's about people. We got a little bit of idea of consequences there. The other one's kind of about dates and locations. What do you think? So those are my thoughts on how history should be taught. I'm going to be talking about this event a little bit in some other videos, and if you hang around, subscribe, whatever, you'll see where I'm going with that because it's relevant to today. All right. I hope that made sense. There'll be a little bit more on this, but there's the literate caveman version of how to teach history. Go read a book.